Here's a rewritten version of the story as a continuous, flowing narrative with no headings, sections, or breaks. Just one seamless tale, slightly expanded in places for smoother pacing and more vivid detail, while keeping the original spirit intact. I was still in my black suit from the funeral, the smell of my mother's vanilla perfume clinging to the fabric, when I found the violation notice taped to my front door like a threat. My father had been buried the day before, and here was Bethany Cromwell informing me that my family's wetland, 40 years of quiet flood protection, was now an unapproved water feature violating community standards. A $500 daily fine would begin immediately unless I complied within 30 days. The excavator arrived 2 days later. Bethany stepped out of her white Range Rover at dawn, designer heels sinking into the mud where my grandfather's cattails used to stand like sentinels. Diesel smoke rolled across the yard as the claw tore through decades of root systems and wetland soil. She waved yesterday's violation notice at me with the casual cruelty of someone who had timed it perfectly, delivered while I was at the graveside. "Too late, Miles," she said. 48-hour compliance period expired. I told her the wetland had saved every mansion downstream from spring floods for 4 decades. She laughed softly. "Not my problem anymore, swamp boy. My grandfather built our house in 1982 on what used to be farmland outside Denver. He was an old-school conservationist who believed you worked with water, not against it. Water goes where water wants to go," he would say, watching red-winged blackbirds weave through the cattails that swayed in the breeze like nature's own quiet orchestra. So he gave a place to rest, a shallow basin fed by seasonal springs, ringed with willows and sedges, deep enough for bass and bullfrogs, wide enough to soak up snowmelt before it could turn the valley into a lake. For 40 years, that little ecosystem quietly kept the neighborhood dry. When I moved back after my divorce, an environmental engineer ironically paid to help developers thread the needle of wetland regulations. I thought I had come home to heal. Instead, I walked into a war. Bethany Cromwell had ruled the HOA for 8 years. 52 blonde highlights that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, a smile that made you check your wallet instinctively. She drove that white Range Rover like it was her personal entitlement vehicle, claiming 2 parking spaces wherever she pleased. Her acrylic nails tapped out impatient rhythms on every surface she touched, a tiny percussion track to her suburban dictatorship. Under her reign, the Latino family's above-ground pool became industrial machinery, requiring impossible permits. The elderly veteran's tomato garden turned into an agricultural operation. The single mother's children's swing set was reclassified as a commercial attraction, disturbing the peace. Every target was someone whose presence inconvenienced the vision she had for Willowbrook Estates. Newer, shinier, more profitable. The original 1982 covenants had protected existing natural features. In 2018, during one of Bethany's administrative updates, that language disappeared. I found a smoking gun in public records after 3 sleepless nights, hunched over my laptop with coffee the consistency of motor oil. A 2018 environmental report, paid for by the same contractor she demanded I hire, turned out to be a feasibility study for draining my wetland to install storm drainage for Phase 2 development. Corporate filings showed Willowbrook Development Partners, LLC, quietly owned by Bethany, her husband's law firm, and a ghost P.O. box. She wasn't protecting property values. She was clearing obstacles to her own multi-million-dollar payday. Then the beavers arrived. I first heard the tale, slaps at dusk, sharp and deliberate, like applause echoing off the old oak grove. Overnight, fresh-cut willow saplings appeared exactly where water pressure would be highest. Mud and stick foundations rose in choke points my own hydraulic models would have chosen. These weren't random pond residents. They were engineers with 40 million years of fieldwork behind them. Beaver dams don't just hold water. They create cascading pond systems, redirect watersheds, manage overflow with an elegance most human designs can only envy. And because of the neighborhood's natural topography, any significant backup in my wetland would overflow straight into the storm drains feeding the newer McMansions, the same ones Bethany and her allies had built. I did what any environmental engineer would do. I helped nature help itself. Colorado funds beaver habitat restoration as low-cost flood control. I placed underwater scent stations with commercial beaver lure, built precise artificial slides at optimal angles, planted young aspen and willow exactly where I wanted construction to focus. Everything stayed within state guidelines. I was simply being a model citizen while the wetland quietly upgraded itself. Wednesday morning, the excavators rolled in again, this time at dawn with forged emergency orders. Bethany followed in her Range Rover like a general. I stood in my bathrobe holding my phone, already on speaker with Federal Agent Rebecca Torres of the Colorado Wildlife Division. "This is protected habitat under active conservation." I called over the engine noise. "Any further disturbance is federal wildlife harassment." The operators shut down. Bethany screamed at them to dig anyway. Then the overnight rain hit capacity. Water the beavers had impounded began moving exactly where physics said it would, through the storm system, backing up, surfacing through the path of least resistance. Bethany's own basement filled first. Muddy water lapped at the foundations of 3 neighboring McMansions while she stood frozen beside silent machines, makeup perfect at 5 voice cracking into panic. Agent Torres arrived with backup, just as the first pumping truck rolled up. Federal wildlife agents documented everything while Bethany tried to explain fraudulent reports to a Channel 9 camera that had been tipped off days earlier. Later, in the county recorder's office, I found the document that ended it all, a perpetual federal conservation easement from 1982 buried in the original deed transfer. The wetland was protected forever. Any destruction carried automatic $250,000 penalties plus mandatory restoration. Protection ran with the land. No HOA covenant, no local vote, no administrative update could touch it. Bethany had knowingly excluded it from the 2018 covenants she herself notarized. Felony easement fraud, felony notary fraud, using forged documents to obtain court orders. Every violation notice she had issued was void. Every fine fraudulent. Every threat criminal. 6 months later, her house is on the market. Federal fines, legal bills, and the collapse of her husband's law firm crushed their finances. She pleaded guilty to easement fraud, environmental crimes, and conspiracy. 2 years probation, permanent ban from HOA boards, real estate license revoked. The development deal evaporated when the EPA designated the watershed protected. 3 other board members resigned after their financial ties surfaced. Mrs. Patterson, the gentle widow next door who had endured 8 years of petty harassment, won the HOA presidency in a landslide. Her first acts: rescind every discriminatory violation from Bethany's era and adopt conservation standards that place federal law above neighborhood politics. Today, the wetland is larger, healthier, a state educational site. School groups come to study natural flood control and ecosystem engineering. The Beaver's cascading dam system now manages stormwater for the whole development while providing habitat for species unseen here in decades. Every evening I sit on the deck with Mrs. Patterson, listening to the twilight symphony my grandfather loved. Red-winged blackbirds calling for the cattails, spring peepers welcoming dusk, the rhythmic slap of beaver tails on water, like nature's own slow, satisfied applause. Bethany thought she could rewrite 40 years of ecology with a gavel and a bad attitude. She never read the deed. She never understood water or beavers. Sometimes justice arrives wearing fur and a flat tail, and sometimes it simply waits for the next hard rain.